Hey everyone! Tonight we dive into a mystery that has haunted a small town for decades, Sacred Heart Convent in San Antonio, Texas. An imposing, weather-worn building tucked away from the world stands silent and eerily still, but beneath its sanctified walls, a dark secret lurks. For years, multiple nuns have disappeared without a trace, and the only thing left behind are whispers faint, frantic rumors of something sinister at play. There's no explanation, no closure, just unanswered questions that have kept many awake at night. Before we dive into the story, though, I must warn you this channel is not for everyone, only for those brave enough to explore the dark secrets that hide in the shadows. If you're ready to hear truths that will make you question everything you thought you knew about the world, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Let us know where you're watching from, because this story could happen anywhere in the United States. Our journey starts with a familiar place, one that should have been a haven, a place of peace and faith. But now, the convent's walls have become a tomb, its floors echoing with unanswered prayers. The nuns who once lived here devoted, disciplined are gone, disappearing in the night, and with their absence came a growing sense of dread. The people of San Antonio have their theories, but the truth remains elusive. The investigation, if it can even be called that, began years ago. When the first nun vanished, Sister Teresa was the first to disappear. And after that, it was like the floodgates opened. One by one, they vanished, Sister Margaret and Sister Clare, and then more. Each disappearance more baffling than the last. No one could explain it. No one had any answers. And the authorities were quick to chalk it up to simple runaway cases. But that explanation never sat right with everyone. Too many nuns, too many vanishing under strange circumstances. But the disappearance of Sister Agnes was different in she had been one of the longest tenured members of the convent. Her dedication unquestionable. When she, too, vanished, it was as if the convent itself had eaten her up. The town was in shock. But something about this case felt darker than the others. People began to whisper, and some began to believe the nuns hadn't run away. No, there was something much more ominous at play, something the convent, and maybe even the church itself, didn't want anyone to uncover. The story really began to take shape when a young journalist, Emma Hartley, decided to step into the mystery. Fresh out of college, Emma was determined to make a name for herself. She had no idea what she was stepping into when she visited the Sacred Heart Convent. She was just looking for a good story, a few easy answers. Little did she know that the truth she would uncover would change her life and her understanding of good and evil forever. Emma's visit started like any other. She made her way into the convent's shadowed halls. Cold and silent as she passed through its arched doorways, the air smelled faintly of incense and old wood, a heavy scent that seemed to press against her chest with each breath she took. It was the perfect place to get lost in thought, the kind of place where the present felt disconnected from the past. But there was something else lurking here, a palpable tension in the air. She could feel it creeping down her spine, tightening her muscles. As Emma made her way through the corridors, she realized just how empty the convent felt. The pews in the chapel were untouched, covered in a thick layer of dust. The candlelight flickering faintly as if fighting against the oppressive silence. There was no one to greet her, no nuns in sight. It was as though the place had been abandoned long ago, despite the fact that people still came by to pray, to visit. There was no sign of life, only the strange quiet that seemed to cling to the walls. Her investigation began to take form when she discovered Sister Agnes's diary. The diary had been left behind, hidden in a corner of one of the convent's many forgotten rooms. The moment she opened it, she felt as though she had unlocked something forbidden. The pages were filled with Sister Agnes's personal thoughts, her musings on the events taking place within the convent's walls. At first glance, they appeared to be mundane references to prayers, daily routines, and the kind of meditative entries that one might expect from a nun. But as Emma read further, she uncovered something far more chilling. Sister Agnes wrote about a dark presence she had felt in the convent, something that had been creeping in over time. There were mentions of strange rituals held in secret, of mysterious symbols drawn in hidden places, and of a power that the nuns had long been bound to. Agnes, in her final days, had become suspicious of the convent's true purpose. She believed that the nuns had been involved in something far darker than prayer and service. They were part of something larger, something that even she couldn't fully comprehend. The last entry in the diary sent a shiver down Emma's spine. "They are coming for me. The truth will be known, but not in time for me to stop them." The discovery of this diary marked the beginning of Emma's obsession. The more she learned, the more she realized how dangerous this journey could be. The convent was hiding something far darker than missing nuns. It was hiding a secret that was so powerful, so malevolent, that it had consumed the lives of those within it. And now, it seemed, Emma was on the brink of uncovering it. But the deeper she dug, the more she began to sense something watching her, waiting for her to make the wrong move. The walls of Sacred Heart Convent seemed to close in around her as she navigated its twisted halls, the diary in hand, and a million questions swirling in her mind. The fear was palpable, hanging in the air like a dark cloud. The sound of her footsteps echoed eerily through the silence, almost as if the place itself were listening. Was she alone in this place, or were the spirits of the missing nuns watching her every move? The air grew thicker with each step Emma took deeper into the heart of Sacred Heart Convent. The sensation of being watched had never been so pronounced. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow that flickered in the dim light, made her wonder if she was truly alone or if the missing nuns were still there, their presence lingering like a haunting specter. Sister Agnes's diary had been her first real lead, but it raised more questions than answers. What were these dark rituals she had mentioned? What power had the nuns been bound to? And who, or what, was coming for her? Just as Sister Agnes had feared, the more Emma pondered these questions, the more unsettling her surroundings became. The convent, with its old stone walls and winding corridors, seemed to stretch on forever. There was a maze-like quality to it, almost as though it were designed to confuse and trap anyone who ventured too deep into its secrets. As Emma began her search for more clues, she noticed something odd. In every room she entered, the temperature dropped. A coldness that was not natural seemed to settle in the air, as if the building itself was trying to expel her. The sensation was unnerving, and it made her heart race faster with each passing moment. But she had to remind herself that this was a search for truth, not a figment of her imagination. Yet, the further she ventured, the more difficult it became to separate fact from fear. The most unsettling discovery came when she stumbled upon a hidden stairwell in the convent's chapel. The door was partially concealed behind a set of old, dusty bookshelves, which Emma managed to push aside. Beneath them, she found a set of iron-wrought stairs descending into the depths below. The air down there was thick, heavy, and smelled faintly of mildew and something metallic like blood. It was a stark contrast to the sterile silence of the convent above. With every step down into the darkness, Emma felt a sense of dread building inside her. She told herself it was just the atmosphere, the oppressive weight of history, but deep down, she knew there was something more. The deeper she descended, the more the silence enveloped her, until it felt like she was walking through a tomb, a place where life had long since been buried. The stairwell led her to a small, cold room. In the center was a wooden table, its surface scratched and worn. The walls were lined with shelves filled with old religious texts, some of them so ancient that they looked like they might crumble at the touch. The strangest thing, however, was the presence of what appeared to be a circle drawn on the floor, a circle made of chalk, so faint that it seemed as if it had been deliberately erased over time, yet still discernible to the trained eye. Emma knelt down, her fingers trembling as she traced the edges of the circle. The markings were like nothing she had ever seen before. They were a mix of religious symbols and strange runes, none of which seemed to belong to any known faith or tradition. It was a bizarre and unsettling sight, and Emma felt an icy chill run down her spine. This, she realized, was what Sister Agnes had been trying to uncover, the strange rituals that had taken place in this very room. As she inspected the room further, she found remnants of old candles, their wax long since hardened, and strange items that looked like offerings bones, odd trinkets, and faded flowers. This room was not simply a forgotten space. It had been used for something dark. Then, from the corner of her eye, Emma saw something that stopped her cold. A small, weathered book lay on a shelf near the far wall, its cover covered in dust but still intact. She picked it up, careful not to disturb its fragile state. The title was barely visible, but as she wiped away the grime, she read the words, "The Sacred Rite of the Hollow Ones." Her hands shook as she opened the book, revealing pages filled with cryptic text. Some of the words seemed to be in Latin, others in a language she couldn't understand, but there was one section that caught her attention, a description of a secret rite that had been performed by the nuns of the convent. It was said to bind the participants to a higher power, one that demanded sacrifice and devotion beyond anything the world could understand. It was a chilling account of the lengths to which the nuns had gone to maintain their power rituals of blood, devotion, and betrayal. The more she read, the more the pieces started to fit together. This was no ordinary convent, and these were no ordinary nuns. They had been part of something far darker, something that went beyond the realms of the church and into the shadows of the occult. And the disappearances, they were not random. The missing nuns hadn't run away. They had been taken. The rituals, the power, the dark pact that had been made so long ago, it had cost them their lives. And now, it seemed, Emma was next. Her heart pounded in her chest as the realization hit her. She had uncovered something she was never meant to see. The convent was a prison, a place of worship turned to a den of secrets, and she was trapped within it. Every step she took, every breath she drew, felt as though she were sinking deeper into the darkness. Suddenly, the faint sound of footsteps echoed through the chamber. Emma froze, her blood running cold. She wasn't alone. Someone or something was coming for her. Her body tensed, and she instinctively hid the book under her coat, her heart hammering against her ribs. She held her breath, straining to hear. The footsteps grew louder, closer. It wasn't just the nuns that haunted this place, it was something far worse. The sound of footsteps grew closer, rhythmic and deliberate, echoing through the silence of the hidden room. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she pressed herself against the cold stone wall, her heart hammering in her chest. The book she had just uncovered felt heavy beneath her coat, a dark weight pressing against her. She tried to steady herself, but the fear that gripped her was paralyzing. Who was down there with her, and how had they found her? The footsteps continued, soft but steady, a constant presence growing closer and closer. Emma's mind raced, and should she run? Could she escape? The stairs, the only exit, were behind her, but they seemed to stretch endlessly in her mind, an impossible path to safety. The shadowed room she stood in offered no escape, no sanctuary from the secrets that were buried deep within its walls. Her eyes darted around, looking for anything to use as a weapon or shield, but the room remained as it was, cold, empty, and foreboding. The only light came from the faint glow of her phone's flashlight, illuminating the worn edges of the ritual circle on the floor and the shelves lined with old, forgotten texts. Her pulse quickened. She had to make a decision. The footsteps were almost upon her. A figure stepped into the room, a tall, slender shadow that barely seemed to belong to the dimly lit surroundings. Emma's breath hitched as she struggled to make out the details of the figure in the flickering light. A nun, but not one she recognized. The woman, if she could even be called that, wore a dark, tattered habit, the fabric old and frayed, as though it had been worn for far too long. Her face was hidden beneath a veil, but her posture, stiff and unyielding, made her seem almost otherworldly. Emma could feel a deep chill in the air as the woman's presence filled the room. She didn't move, didn't speak. She simply stood there, her form towering over Emma like an ominous specter. The seconds felt like hours as Emma fought to remain calm, her mind screaming at her to flee, but she couldn't move. The woman's gaze, though hidden behind the veil, seemed to pierce through the darkness, searching, waiting for something. It was as though she knew Emma had uncovered something dangerous. Emma's grip on the book tightened, and she instinctively stepped back, her breath catching in her throat. The nun finally spoke, her voice soft but cold, like a whisper carried on the wind. "You should not have come here." Her words, though simple, sent a shiver down Emma's spine. There was a strange heaviness to them, a warning that went beyond mere caution. This wasn't just about the convent. This wasn't just about the missing nuns. It was something far older, something far more malevolent than Emma had ever imagined. "Why are you here?" Emma managed to ask, her voice shaking. She knew the answer. She was here for the truth, for the answers that had eluded everyone for so long. But something about the nun's presence made her question whether she truly wanted to know what lay behind the walls of Sacred Heart Convent. The nun did not answer immediately. Instead, she stepped closer, her movements slow and deliberate, like the quiet unfolding of a dark omen. As she moved, Emma felt a strange pressure build in the air, a heaviness that seemed to wrap around her chest, constricting her breath. The nun's presence was suffocating, oppressive. "You have uncovered more than you should have," the nun finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The convent has its secrets, but they are not meant for outsiders, not meant for you." The word struck Emma like a physical blow. She had always known there was something more to the convent's history, something hidden beneath the surface. But this felt like a warning, a promise that the truth was not just dangerous, it was deadly. "I'm not leaving without the truth," Emma said, her voice steadier now, despite the fear threatening to overwhelm her. The nun's silence in response only deepened the tension in the room, the oppressive air pressing down on Emma like a vice. Without another word, the nun turned and began to walk slowly toward the far wall, her robes trailing behind her. Emma's instincts screamed at her to follow, to understand what this woman knew, to learn more about the darkness that had consumed this place. But a deep, primal fear held her in place, her feet frozen to the floor. The nun reached the far wall and raised her hand, pressing it against a concealed panel hidden in the stone. With a soft click, the wall shifted, revealing a hidden passageway that led deeper into the bowels of the convent. The passage was narrow, barely wide enough for a single person to walk through, its darkness impenetrable beyond a few feet. The nun turned back to Emma, her face still hidden behind the veil. "If you wish to learn," she said softly, "come. But know this, once you enter, there is no returning. The truth will claim you, just as it claimed us." Emma's heart raced as she stared at the narrow passage. She had no choice. The truth was just within her grasp. And despite the warning, despite the terror that clung to her every step, she had to go forward. There was no turning back now. She had uncovered too much, and there was no way out but to continue. Taking a deep breath, she stepped toward the passage, her footfall echoing in the silence. As she crossed the threshold, she felt the temperature drop even further, the air growing colder and more oppressive as she descended into the hidden depths of the convent. The passageway twisted and turned, the walls closing in on her, until the light from her phone barely illuminated the path ahead. With every step, the sense of dread grew stronger, heavier. The sound of her own breathing seemed deafening in the stillness. She didn't know how much farther the passage went, but she knew one thing for sure: she was closer than ever to the truth, and it would be her undoing. The passage seemed to stretch on forever, twisting and winding like a snake through the very foundation of Sacred Heart Convent. Emma's breath came in shallow, rapid bursts, the only sound accompanying her footsteps as she ventured deeper into the cavernous darkness. Her phone's dim light flickered with each step, casting shadows that seemed to dance on the stone walls, creating ghostly figures that vanished as soon as she looked directly at them. Each turn, each narrow space, only added to the suffocating sense of isolation. The walls seemed to press in on her, the space shrinking the farther she went, as if the convent itself were alive, watching her. There were no sounds but her own, and the unsettling whisper of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Every instinct told her to turn back, to run, but the pull of the truth, the need to understand what had happened to the missing nuns, kept her moving forward. She had already crossed the point of no return, and there was no going back. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of winding corridors and spiraling depths, the passage opened into a large, cold chamber. It was unlike any part of the convent Emma had seen. Before, there were no windows, no soft candlelight flickering, only darkness. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone, and something else, something metallic and sour, like blood. The temperature had plummeted even further, and Emma's breath clouded in front of her as she stepped into the room. At the center of the chamber was a massive stone altar. The altar was old, covered in scratches and wear, as though it had been used for centuries. Strange symbols, similar to those she had seen in the diary, were etched into its surface. These weren't just marks, they were ritualistic, deliberate. This wasn't a place of worship. This was a place of sacrifice. Around the altar, there were faded remnants of candles, their wax long since melted, forming grotesque shapes on the stone floor. The walls were lined with more shelves, shelves filled with old, musty books, many of which looked too fragile to touch. But it wasn't the books that caught Emma's attention now. It was the figures standing motionless around the altar. There were 5 of them, nuns, but not the kind of nuns she had seen at the convent. Their habits were torn, stained with dirt and what looked like dried blood. Their faces were covered in hoods, but Emma could see their eyes, eyes that were glazed over, distant, as if they were no longer fully human. Their presence in the room was like a heavy weight, oppressive and suffocating. They stood in a perfect circle, their hands raised toward the altar, as if performing a silent ritual, frozen in time. Emma's heart raced, her body trembling as she stepped closer, drawn by some unexplainable force. She had uncovered something horrifying, something beyond her comprehension. She tried to speak, to break the silence, but no words came out. The room was thick with an eerie energy that made it feel as though even sound was forbidden here. Her eyes flitted from one nun to the next, searching for any sign of life, but they were all still, unblinking. Emma stepped closer, her mind racing. What had happened to them? Why had they abandoned their vows? Why had they become part of this dark and twisted ritual? The answer came to her in a flash. The ritual wasn't something the nuns had been forced into, it was something they had chosen. The convent, this place, wasn't just a sanctuary for prayer. It had been built on a foundation of power, one that demanded a dark price. The missing nuns hadn't disappeared because they had been kidnapped or murdered. No, they had willingly gone into the depths of this forbidden place, becoming part of something far older and darker than the church had ever intended. The nuns were no longer human. They were something else, something bound to this place, this altar, by ancient pacts that required them to give up everything they once were. This was no ordinary convent. It was a place of worship, yes, but it was also a place of sacrifice, of binding spirits, of summoning forces that the world was never meant to see. Emma felt a hand on her shoulder, and she spun around, startled. The nun who had guided her into this dark place stood behind her, her face still hidden behind the veil, her presence almost ghostly in the dim light. "You have come too far," the nun said, her voice low, almost sorrowful. "You have seen what should never be seen. You now know what we were bound to, what we are still bound to." Emma's stomach twisted with fear as she took a step back. The room, the figures surrounding the altar, seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. The nun's words echoed in her mind, but it was the finality in her tone that unsettled Emma the most. She wasn't just a guide to this place, she was a part of it, a willing participant in the dark rituals that had cursed this convent, this land, and all those who came into contact with it. "Why did you let me in?" Emma asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why bring me here?" The nun's eyes, though hidden beneath the veil, seemed to pierce through Emma with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "The truth must be known. It must be witnessed. The world must understand the cost of the power we sought." She paused, as though contemplating her next words carefully. "But be warned, young one, the price of knowledge is steep. The truth will bind you to this place. It will consume you, as it consumed us." Emma's mind reeled, and she had come seeking answers, but now she was faced with the reality of the cost. The nuns, these lost souls, had paid the price, and now Emma was being offered the same fate. Her quest for the truth had led her here, to this chamber of horrors, and she realized with a sickening certainty that there was no escaping the consequences of what she had uncovered. As if to confirm her thoughts, the other nuns began to move, their slow, deliberate steps forming a circle around her. Emma's heart hammered in her chest as she turned to face each one. Their eyes, once vacant, seemed to flicker with some semblance of recognition, but there was nothing human left in them. They were merely vessels' tools for the power they had summoned, tools that were now doomed to carry out the dark will of whatever force held sway over the convent. Emma tried to back away, but the walls, the very ground beneath her, seemed to shift, trapping her in the circle. There was no way out. She had become part of their world, now a world where the boundaries between life and death, between the living and the damned, no longer existed. The last thing Emma saw, before the darkness swallowed her, was the nun who had brought her here. Her voice a final whisper, barely audible above the rising wind. "You should not have come here." The darkness swallowed Emma whole, and with it, the world she once knew. The oppressive air that had clung to the convent's lower chambers now wrapped around her like a suffocating shroud, each breath she took feeling heavier than the last. She couldn't see, couldn't move. The walls that had once been a part of the convent, cold and ancient, now seemed to close in on her, pressing in from all sides. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, and the silence was deafening, broken only by the pounding of her own heart. Emma's mind was racing, struggling to comprehend what was happening to her. She had been so close to uncovering the truth, so close to understanding the dark, twisted history of Sacred Heart Convent, but now it seemed the truth had her. She was no longer an outsider. She was no longer simply an observer of the horrors that had taken place within these walls. She was part of it now, bound to the convent by forces she couldn't understand. The room, the altar, the nuns, they had all become distant, as though they were fading from her reality, becoming nothing more than dark memories of a place she was no longer meant to leave. And yet, despite the overwhelming sense of fear, there was something else inside her, a compulsion to understand, to confront the reality of what she had uncovered. The darkness, the fear, and the cold were not enough to silence the gnawing curiosity that now consumed her. Her eyes, once adjusted to the dim light, began to pick out shapes in the blackness. Slowly, the figures of the nuns appeared, but they weren't the same. They had changed, their forms now more insubstantial, less human. They were no longer bound by flesh, but by something far darker, something that made their movements slow and deliberate, as though they were controlled by an unseen force, a power greater than any earthly one. Emma's eyes flicked to the altar, the ancient stone altar that had been the heart of the ritual. The markings on it, the symbols that had so disturbed her earlier, now seemed to glow faintly, like embers in the night. There was no mistaking it. Now the altar wasn't just a place of sacrifice. It was a conduit for the power that had been summoned long ago, a power that had bound these nuns, these lost souls, to the convent and to its dark purpose. Her heart skipped a beat as she realized the truth. The convent wasn't just a place of religious devotion, it was a vessel for something ancient, something dark that required sacrifice. And those who had disappeared, the nuns, the ones who had vanished, hadn't been taken by force. They had become part of the ritual, willingly or otherwise. They had offered themselves to the power that had been summoned, binding their souls to it, just as the ones standing in the circle now had. Emma's hands trembled as she slowly moved closer to the altar, drawn by an invisible pull. She could feel it, a presence in the air like an electric current that charged the very space around her. The ritual, the binding, the sacrifice, it was all a part of this ancient force that had taken root in the convent. And now it was reaching out to claim her as well. A voice, low and raspy, echoed in the room, sending a jolt of terror through Emma. It was a voice that came from everywhere and nowhere, a voice that seemed to reverberate in her very bones. "You've come for the truth," the voice whispered. "But the truth is not what you think. It is the price you will pay." Emma's blood ran cold as she realized the voice wasn't coming from the nuns. It was coming from something far older, something far more powerful, something that had been here long before the convent had been built. The force that had been summoned, the force that had taken root here, was alive, and it was waiting for her. The room seemed to shift around her, the walls closing in again, the space growing smaller, suffocating. Emma could feel the weight of the truth pressing down on her, a truth so horrifying it felt as though it would crush her. There was no escape from it, no way out. She had come here seeking answers, but the answers had already been written in the blood of the nuns who had come before her. She had uncovered the secret of Sacred Heart Convent, but now she understood the cost. The nuns had given up their humanity to serve the power that lived here. They had sacrificed themselves to it, binding their souls to the dark force that resided within the walls. And now, Emma, too, was part of the ritual. She turned to face the altar once more, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The symbols that had once been faintly glowing now burned with a fierce intensity, the light pulsing in time with her heartbeat. There was no escaping the truth. There was no escaping the force that had claimed this place. The walls trembled as if the very foundation of the convent was shaking. A deep, guttural sound, like a growl, emanated from the altar. Reverberating through the chamber, the nuns, their movements no longer slow and deliberate, but frantic, began to circle the altar, their hands raised in unison as they chanted in a language Emma couldn't understand. The air grew thick, suffocating, and the temperature dropped even further, to the point where Emma's teeth began to chatter. She knew what was coming next. She could feel it. This was the final stage of the ritual. The binding was almost complete. The force that had waited so long to claim her was reaching out, and there would be no escaping it. Emma opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Her body was frozen, as though she were trapped in some sort of ancient spell, a spell that had been cast long before she had arrived. The nuns chanted louder, their voices growing in intensity, and the room seemed to collapse in on itself. There was no longer any distinction between her and the darkness. Emma had become part of the convent, part of the ritual. She had uncovered the truth, but it was too late. The price had been paid, and the truth would never let her leave. The darkness enveloped Emma, pressing in from all sides. It was as if the walls themselves were closing in, folding around her like the embrace of a long-forgotten nightmare. The air had become thick with an unnatural cold, freezing her to the bone. Her breath came in shallow gasps, the only sound in the suffocating silence. The chanting of the nuns had become a low, monotonous hum in the background, each word vibrating in the air, filling the space around her with an overwhelming sense of inevitability. Emma's chest tightened as though the very atmosphere was suffocating her. She tried to move, to scream, but her body was paralyzed, held in place by something far beyond her comprehension. Her limbs felt heavy, weighted down, as though the very gravity of the room was pressing against her. She could no longer distinguish between the present and the past, between the corporeal and the supernatural. Time itself had become fluid, as if the convent existed in a place beyond the rules of the world she had known. The more the chanting grew louder, the more it seemed to permeate her very soul, seeping into her thoughts, her consciousness. It wasn't just a ritual, it was a process, an ancient and relentless force that demanded submission. She couldn't escape. She had entered this place seeking answers, wanting to expose the truth that had been buried for so long. But now she was trapped in the heart of it, bound by the very power she had uncovered. Suddenly, the room shifted. The walls seemed to dissolve, and Emma found herself standing in an entirely different place, a place so familiar, yet utterly alien. She was back in the convent's chapel, but it wasn't the same. The air was heavy, dense with the same oppressive energy that had filled the hidden chamber beneath the convent. The nuns stood in a circle, their faces now visible, eyes glazed, fixed in a state of trance. Their lips moved, but the words they spoke were incomprehensible. In the center of the circle was the altar, the same altar, but this time it was bathed in an otherworldly light, the symbols carved into its surface glowing with an eerie, unnatural radiance. Emma's gaze was drawn to the altar, her feet moving of their own accord, dragging her toward it. She wanted to resist, but something inside her urged her forward, pulling her like a moth to a flame. As she approached, the nuns' chanting intensified, their voices rising to a crescendo, and Emma felt herself drawn closer to the altar's power. Her body trembled as she reached out with trembling fingers, brushing the surface of the stone. It was warm, unnaturally so, and she could feel the pulse of something ancient and malevolent beneath the stone. It was alive. It was waiting. The room seemed to twist around her. And for a moment, Emma's surroundings blurred. She was no longer in the chapel. She was in a forest, a dark, foreboding place where the trees twisted upward like the skeletal hands of the dead, their branches reaching for the sky. The sky itself was pitch black, and the only light came from the altar now floating, suspended in midair, glowing with that same eerie radiance. The nuns were there, too, standing in a circle around the altar, their eyes now black voids. They weren't human anymore. They were something else entirely. Emma could hear their voices quiet, pleading, but distant. It was as if they were calling to her from another world, urging her to join them, to become part of the dark force that had taken over the convent. "You belong here, Emma," one of the nuns whispered, though her voice felt more like a part of Emma's own thoughts than a spoken word. "This is your destiny. You have always been meant for this." The words filled Emma's mind, drowning out everything else. She struggled to push them away, to find some sense of herself, but it was as if the darkness had taken root in her very soul. It was inside her, consuming her from within. The altar began to shift, its surface cracking open, revealing a dark void beneath. A cold wind blew from the opening, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of death. From the darkness emerged something new, someone. At first, it was hard to tell, but as it emerged from the void, Emma saw the form of a woman, her face obscured by shadows, her body draped in tattered black robes. The woman stepped into the light, and Emma's breath caught in her throat. It was Sister Agnes, the nun whose diary had led her to this place, the woman whose disappearance had triggered the unraveling of this entire mystery. But this was not the Sister Agnes Emma had read about. This was something twisted, something corrupted. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, her eyes wide and unblinking, her lips curled into a smile. But it wasn't a smile of warmth. It was a smile of something far darker, something that belonged to a creature not bound by the rules of the living. "You have come to understand the truth," Sister Agnes said, her voice hollow and distant, as if coming from the depths of the earth itself. "But the truth is not what you think. We are not bound by the world of the living, Emma. We are bound by something far older, far more powerful. And now, so are you." Emma staggered backward, her heart pounding in her chest. The world around her spun, and she struggled to maintain her grip on reality. She couldn't fight the force that had taken root in this place. She couldn't outrun it. The more she fought, the deeper it seemed to dig into her soul, pulling her closer to the darkness. Sister Agnes reached out with a skeletal hand, her fingers cold and brittle. "You will join us, Emma. You will become one of us. You will remain here with us forever." The words echoed in her mind as the darkness closed in around her. The nuns circled the altar, their voices merging into a single chant, louder and louder, until Emma's head spun with the force of it. There was no escape, no way out. The truth had claimed her, and in that moment, she realized that the convent was not just a place of dark rituals. It was a prison for lost souls. And now she was one of them. Her body felt weightless, and the world around her seemed to fade into nothingness. The last thing she heard was the voice of Sister Agnes, whispering one final warning. "You are ours now." And then the darkness consumed her. When Emma's consciousness returned, it wasn't with the comfort of waking up from a nightmare. It was like emerging from an abyss into a place that was worse than before, darker, colder, more suffocating. Her vision was blurred, the edges of the world distorted and unreal. She could feel the weight of the air pressing down on her chest, the chill of it seeping into her skin. Her limbs felt heavy, as though they no longer belonged to her. The scent of decay and the metallic tang of blood lingered in the air, mingling with the overwhelming stench of something ancient and untouchable. For a long moment, she didn't know where she was, only that the darkness she had felt earlier had returned with a vengeance. She tried to move, to speak, but her body refused to obey. She was no longer in control. The strange pull, that magnetic force that had drawn her deeper into the convent's hidden chambers, still clung to her like an invisible chain. It was as though the very essence of the convent had claimed her, just as it had claimed all the others. Slowly, her senses began to sharpen, and the world around her came into focus, if only for a moment. The room she found herself in was vast, a cavernous space with high, arching ceilings that seemed to stretch into infinity. It felt ancient, untouched by time. The walls were lined with strange symbols, some of which Emma recognized from the diary symbols that once had been nothing more than strange markings, but now seemed to pulse with life, with power. The air was heavy with the hum of the energy that filled the space, a dark, oppressive force that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Emma tried to sit up, but her body refused to cooperate. She felt tethered, bound in place. It was as if her very soul had been locked away, imprisoned within the walls of this unseen realm. The ritual, the ancient binding, had worked. She was no longer a mere observer. She had become part of the convent's dark truth. The nuns stood around her, no longer human, but not entirely spectral either. Their faces were obscured by shadows, their bodies distorted, twisted by the dark magic that had claimed them. They moved as if they were part of the very air itself, their motions fluid and unnatural. They weren't alive, not in the way Emma understood. They were echoes, shadows of their former selves, bound to the force that had been summoned long ago. And then, from the center of the room, emerged Sister Agnes. Her once familiar face was now a mask of emptiness, her eyes wide and unblinking, her mouth twisted in an expression that was not quite a smile. She was no longer the woman Emma had read about in the diary, the nun who had once lived a life of faith and devotion. Now, she was something entirely different, a creature bound to the convent and to the ancient power that had taken root here. Sister Agnes approached Emma slowly, her movements deliberate, as if savoring the moment. She stopped in front of Emma, her cold, hollow eyes locking onto hers. "You are here now," she said, her voice distant and echoing, as though it came from some far-off place. "You have crossed the threshold. Emma, you are one of us now." Emma's throat tightened as the words sank in. She wanted to scream, to fight, to break free from the force that held her captive, but she could barely move, let alone escape. The power in the room was too strong, too overwhelming. It was as though she had entered a space where time no longer mattered, where the very fabric of reality had been torn apart and remade by the rituals performed here. "You thought you could uncover the truth," Sister Agnes continued, her voice a low, haunted whisper. "But the truth was never meant to be uncovered. It was meant to claim you." Emma's heart pounded as the gravity of the situation hit her. She had thought she was close to finding the answers, to exposing the dark secrets of Sacred Heart Convent. But now she understood. The convent wasn't just hiding a dark truth. It was a place of power, a place that drew people and people like her only to consume them. The nuns hadn't disappeared because they had been taken. They had willingly become part of the ritual, part of the dark force that had been summoned in the name of something far older, far more malevolent. "Why did you bring me here?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. She didn't want to know, didn't want to hear the answer, but the question slipped from her lips before she could stop it. Sister Agnes smiled, but it was a smile devoid of warmth. It was the smile of a being that had long since lost its humanity. "Because you were always meant to come here," she said softly. "You are part of the cycle. Emma, the truth is not something that can be understood, and it is something that must be lived. And now you will live it with us." The room seemed to pulse with energy, the air thickening around Emma. The nuns began to chant again, their voices rising in unison, a sound so foreign, so primal, that it felt like it was reverberating through Emma's very bones. She could feel the energy building around her, filling the room until it was almost unbearable. The symbols on the walls began to glow brighter, the light flashing in time with the chanting, each pulse of energy tightening its grip on her. "You will join us, Emma," Sister Agnes whispered, leaning down until her face was mere inches from Emma's. "You will become one with the convent, one with the power that binds us all. You will serve it just as we have." Emma's body began to tremble uncontrollably as the force surrounding her grew stronger. The coldness, the darkness, it was consuming her, pulling her deeper into its grasp. She could feel her consciousness slipping, her thoughts fading as the ritual claimed her. "You are no longer an outsider," Sister Agnes said softly. "You are one of us. Welcome home." The darkness closed in around Emma like a vice, and for a moment she felt herself slipping away, fading into the very shadows that had haunted the convent for so long. And then there was nothing. There was no sound, no light, no sensation at all. It was as though Emma had ceased to exist. The world around her had dissolved into nothingness, a vast void that stretched on forever. Without shape or form, her consciousness flickered, like a candle struggling to stay alight in the wind. But it was growing dimmer with each passing moment. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, a distant sound began to emerge, a faint, like the echo of something long buried in the earth. It was the soft murmur of voices, not one, but many whispers, rising and falling, as if calling to her from the depths of the void. Emma could feel them, their presence pressing against her, their words seeping into her mind like a poison. They were the nuns. She could hear their chants, but they were no longer the same. These words were different, ancient, primal, filling the empty space around her, closing in on her, until the very air itself seemed to vibrate with the force of their power. She tried to scream, to fight back, but no sound came. Her body, her voice, her very soul, everything was still, imprisoned in this eternal darkness. She wasn't sure if she was even breathing anymore. The force that had claimed her now had her entirely. And then the voices stopped. The silence was deafening. Emma's eyes, though she wasn't sure if they were truly open, began to adjust to the absence of light. Her mind, too, was beginning to stir again, like someone waking from a long, troubled sleep. Slowly, fragments of memories returned to her, hazy and fragmented. The convent, the nuns, Sister Agnes. She remembered the pull of the dark power, the way it had consumed everything in its path, including her. The ritual that had bound her to this place, to this world beyond the living, had been complete. She was no longer part of the world she had known. She had been claimed by something much older, much darker. The room around her materialized slowly, taking shape in the absence of light, like a fog lifting. It was no longer the cold, stone chamber she had seen before. It was now a place entirely of shadows of lost souls, their forms twisting in the dark like wraiths, forever bound to the convent, forever a part of the power that had been summoned here. Emma felt her body shift slowly, as if it were no longer entirely her own. Her limbs moved in stiff, unnatural motions, and for a moment she was frozen, unable to control herself. Her vision, though clouded, began to clear, and she saw the nuns, no longer human, but figures of shadow and light, their features contorted and twisted by the darkness that had taken hold of them. They stood in a circle, as they had before, their hands raised to the sky in worship, their eyes wide and unblinking. But this was different now. They weren't performing a ritual anymore. They weren't waiting for a force to come. They had already been consumed long ago. And Emma, she had become one of them. Her reflection caught in one of the dark pools that had formed at the center of the room. The woman staring back at her was no longer Emma Hartley, the young journalist who had come to uncover the truth. She was something else now, something far older, a creature bound to the convent, to the darkness that had claimed her. Her eyes were wide and empty, her face pale and twisted by the same force that had taken the nuns. Her mouth curled into a smile that was not her own, a grin that belonged to the ancient power now alive within her. She could feel it now, the power coursing through her, the darkness filling her veins, her very soul. She was no longer a witness to the horrors of Sacred Heart Convent. She was a part of them, a part of the darkness that had consumed this place for so long. "You are one of us now," a voice whispered, and Emma knew, with a sinking dread, that it was Sister Agnes. But the voice wasn't from her. It came from the shadows, from the force that had claimed them all. "The truth is no longer a burden you must bear. It is your gift." Emma's hands lifted slowly, without her command, her fingers curling in an unnatural way, as though they had grown accustomed to the power that flowed through her. Her body moved without thought, her motions like the nun's deliberate, controlled, unyielding. Her lips parted, and a sound escaped. But it was not her voice anymore. It was the voice of the darkness, the power that had claimed them all. "You will serve," the voice said, "as we have served. The cycle is complete. You are one of us." Emma's thoughts fractured as the dark power enveloped her, burying her memories, her identity, beneath layers of shadow. She had once been driven by curiosity, by a need to uncover the truth, but now that truth had swallowed her whole. She was no longer the journalist, the seeker of knowledge. She was a vessel, a tool bound to this place, to this dark power that had claimed her. The last shred of Emma's humanity flickered weakly, like a candle caught in a storm. But it was quickly extinguished by the overwhelming presence of the darkness. She was lost. She was part of the convent now, a prisoner of the shadows that had consumed her. And just like the nuns before her, Emma was no longer free. She had become part of the cycle, part of the dark truth that would never see the light of day, the truth that could never be understood. She only lived. In the silence that followed, the power grew stronger, its grip tightening around the convent, around the souls it had claimed. Emma stood with the others, her eyes wide and unblinking, her mind lost to the darkness, forever bound to the place where the truth could never be escaped.